London, Manchester, Liverpool. In England, a single cold downpour overnight can kill you just as effectively as frost. Not ice, not snow, just ordinary rain at +6 to +10 degrees Celsius. Because water steals heat much faster than air, wet clothing destroys insulation, and the wind finishes off whatever heat is left. But the most chilling part is something else. The people living on the streets have long developed their own quiet, low cost, almost invisible survival engineering. And today we're going to break down how homeless people endure English rain when they have no home, no dryer, and no margin for error. An ordinary person thinks, oh, it's just rain. Find some shelter, put on a jacket, wait it out. But on the street, your standard solutions often don't work at all. Under a bridge, it's damp because of condensation. In the park, you get blasted by side wind. You can't stay long in an entranceway. Cameras, residents, police, private security. Night shelters have their own rules. Not everywhere they let you in with your stuff. Not everywhere there are free spots. Not everywhere it's safe. And if you get completely soaked even once, then a chain reaction starts. The clothes get heavier. It's harder to move. You can't sleep. The body doesn't recover. Immunity drops. And the next night hits an already weakened organism. The first thing a person on the street realizes during a proper English downpour, the main enemy is not the rain coming from above. The main enemy is the water coming from below and from the sides, because the rain from above can be at least partially deflected with a hood, a visor, a plastic bag, or a scrap of tarp. But wet concrete, wet ground, and wind suck the heat out of you for hours. Cold doesn't only travel through the air, it travels through contact. When your body lies on a damp surface, thermal conduction kicks in. Your heat flows directly into the concrete, wood, stone, or asphalt. If there's no insulating layer between you and the ground, you are literally warming the street with your own body heat. That's why street survival begins not with what to cover myself with, but with what to lie on. The cheapest insulation module is cardboard. Regular multi-layer cardboard acts as a primitive insulator because of the air pockets trapped inside its layers. It's not magic, but it breaks direct contact with cold, wet ground. A single layer gives up quickly. Two or three layers actually give you a fighting chance. That's why cardboard found behind Tesco, Sainsbury's, Aldi, and Lidl, stacked near loading docks and warehouse areas, isn't trash. It's a building material. The best pieces are large, dry sheets from appliance deliveries or fruit crates. Lay a foam pad, a chunk of packing foam, or even a folded dry jacket on top, and the effect multiplies. The reason is simple. Trapped air slows heat transfer. Stack the layers, stack the insulation. But here's the problem within the problem. Cardboard works only while it's dry. The moment it absorbs moisture, it almost completely loses its insulating properties. So the next level move is making the bottom layer absorb the punishment while the upper layer stays relatively dry. Experienced street survivors operate on a simple logic: a sacrificial dirty layer, an insulating layer, and a body layer. A layered system, not a single mat. The bottom is whatever you can afford to lose. The middle is whatever traps air. The top is fabric or your sleeping layer. Now the second problem, water doesn't just get you wet. It destroys the thermal insulation of clothing. Dry fabric traps air. Wet fabric squeezes that air out. And without the air layer, the body starts losing heat much faster. That's why on the street what matters isn't the warmest piece of clothing, but the most adjustable, layerable clothing. Not one thick sweater, but several layers you can regulate. T-shirt, hoodie, cheap fleece. On top, a waterproof layer, or at least a builder's poncho slash rain cape. Even the simplest poncho from Poundland or a raincoat from Sports Direct sometimes does more than a heavy jacket that gets soaked and turns into a wet, heavy burden. And here physics kicks in: convection. Wind blows the warm air out through any gaps in your clothing. So even if you're not completely soaked, strong wind destroys that small microclimate your body managed to create around itself. That's why tightening cuffs, covering your neck, closing gaps at the lower back. This isn't about looking comfortable. This is a fight for every degree. A person on the street often looks strange, not because they don't understand style. They're just building a crooked but functional thermos around their body out of whatever they could find. The third module, protection against drip penetration. The problem isn't just that it's raining hard. The problem is that water finds a weak spot and starts working on the principle of continuous breakthrough. One hole in your shoe leads to your foot is wet all night. One unsealed seam on your jacket leads to water run straight down your back under every layer at once. One sagging tarp leads to a single drop falls in the exact same spot for hours, soaking precisely the place where your core warmth should be. That's why outdoor engineering in England often looks like this: a slight slope mandatory runoff directed away, and no contact between the cover and your face or clothing. Because if a plastic bag, tarp, or sheet of polythene lies directly on fabric, water, through pressure and contact, starts seeping through much faster. But if there's an air gap, even a makeshift one, even a homemade shelter performs dramatically better. That's exactly why a piece of tarpaulin, an advertising banner, construction plastic, or a thick garbage bag is valued not for the material itself, but for the shape you can force it into. Shape decides everything. A flat cover sags and collects pools of water. A sloped cover sheds the flow. A low cover is less visible, but ventilates poorly. A high cover stays drier, but draws more attention. Out on the street, every structure is a compromise between physics and social risk. Module 4, Footwear. Most people underestimate how fast wet feet collapse the entire system. Once the foot loses heat, the skin softens, blisters form, fungal infections set in, and inflammation follows. The person starts walking less. And walking less means searching for fewer resources, missing the closing times of shelters and aid points. One pair of wet socks a day translates directly into reduced mobility tomorrow. And reduced mobility tomorrow means lost food, lost dry shelter, lost information, and lost time. That's why socks function almost like street currency. A dry pair is sometimes more valuable than a spare t-shirt. People who survive long term protect at least one dry set until the very last moment. Even when everything on the outside is soaked, a dry reserve saved for sleep or for a moment of dangerous cold is the difference between pushing through and breaking down. A cheap pair from Primark, Matalan, a charity shop, or a church outreach handout might cost almost nothing, but in practice it functions as medical prevention. The part nobody talks about openly on the street, staying warm, is only half the problem. The other half is staying somewhere you won't be moved on before dawn, because the physically ideal spot is often the worst one by the city's logic. A dry corner is someone's doorway. A covered overhang sits under cameras. A warm ventilation grate is the first place someone notices you. So survival becomes a calculation, slightly worse on dryness, but lower risk of confrontation. Lower risk of a fine, lower risk of being woken at 3 a.m. and pushed out into a downpour. The most effective street strategy isn't heroism, it's invisibility. Don't build anything visible from a distance. Don't create a debris field around yourself. Don't make noise, don't block a path. Don't turn a temporary shelter into an obvious reason for immediate removal. In the city, visibility punishes you almost as fast as the weather. The larger the footprint, the shorter the time you have. This is where the brutal logic of the English street takes shape. The best spot isn't the most comfortable one, it's the most tolerable one to the system around you. Dry enough, hidden enough, safe enough, and close enough to morning resources, close to a supermarket, a public toilet, a charity handout, a station where you can warm up inside a moving crowd, a corner where Pret, Greg's, Costa, or McDonald's opens early, where you can stand under a roof, blend in, dry off near the heat of the equipment, or buy the cheapest hot drink available if you manage to hold on to a few coins. Now for the most uncomfortable part of the chain. Say a person spends one night in the rain. They don't sleep enough. Their clothes are wet. Their feet are raw. Come morning, they have less energy to go looking for help. They miss the clothing handout. They don't get dry things. By evening, they're facing the rain again in the same soaked kit. By the second or third night like that, the body isn't just cold anymore, it's losing. A cold becomes bronchitis. Skin breaks down. Foot infections take hold. Exhaustion sets in. And none of this requires frost. It can start with ordinary English dampness that a passing stranger would barely register as bad weather. That's why people on the street hold on to things that look trivial from the outside: a piece of dry cardboard, a clean plastic bag, a pair of socks, a spot out of the wind, early access to a covered area, information about where the police aren't moving people on tonight. These aren't small things, they are structural components, a system where each element compensates for the failure of another.